I'm going to break this next section into 2 videos. It's going to be Drop3D, but then there's also some Drop3D stuff you can do with stencils, but I'm going to put that in another video. So just if you're coming along to this video, make sure you check out the next video as well. And you're all probably tired of seeing the Rancor and the Ninja Turtle, so I'm going to just grab some projects that we have available to everybody. So hit the comma key on your keyboard, go to your Lightbox, go in here to your demo projects, and we're going to be playing around with this frog and this demo drone right here. So double click the demo tree frog, and that's going to give us a little frog mesh here. Let's go ahead, hop out of perspective mode, hop out of, turn off the floor, and we're going to be doing some stuff to this frog. And one of those things is going to be Drop3D. So if we go in here to our document, if anybody remembers my old Eat 3D videos where we talked more in depth for the 2.5D functionality of ZBrush, projection master and stuff like that, this is akin to that. A little bit easier functionality than that. So basically, it is pretty simple. In your document, you now have a Drop3D button. What that's going to do is basically put that in a state to where it drops it to your canvas, quote unquote. And what that means is basically, actually, I guess I can show you that. So right now we have an object here, right? And it's made of multiple subtools. However, if I go out of edit mode and it says, do you want to switch or always switch? We can just say switch. And what that's going to do is drop this object to the canvas. It's 2D. It's a 2D image, so you can go in here, go from your tool palette over here. You now have some 2.5D brushes in here that you can modify this object. Along with the pixels that make up the image, RGB pixels, let's say, or color pixels, there's also height information. So if we go over here to our document and underneath alpha, let's go in here to alpha, transfer, and say grab doc. That's going to grab your document and your alpha of your document, and you're going to see it's going to give you an alpha information, which is your height data. So the geometry that's closer to your camera is brighter white. The geometry that's further away from your camera is darker until it goes to basically nothing. It's just a transparency around the object, pure black basically. So this is both image data and height data. So what that means is if I go in here to my 2.5D tools, it's not just 2D tools like Photoshop where you can paint. You can also go in here and play around with, for example, this bump brush. You can go through here, and again, we're not drawing on the actual object. It's just a snapshot representation of the object we had that is now pixels and height data. And you can play around with these brushes to play with both of those properties at the same time. So here's the simple brush, and the simple brush is basically just what it says, simple brush. You can change out the alpha to get a different stroke in here. There's dot stroke. You can switch this to freehand to get a little bit more of a smoother stroke. You can go in here and change your spacing down to, again, smooth that stroke out. There's line in here, so you can go through here and you can just drag out a line with an alpha. You can also go in here to single layer brush, for example, and you can draw a single layer on your object, and of course, again, change your alpha, change your stroke. We'll talk more about these in depth. So here we are, just single layer brush on our 2.5D. There's color options in here, there's smudge options, all sorts of really fun, cool things you can do. Deco brush, so you can do, here's RGB turned on, you can turn on Z add, change your Z intensity. And the other cool thing too is every stroke you do, you can also hit W after you make that stroke, and you can move it around. So again, we'll get more in depth on this. I just wanted to kind of show you some 2.5D functionality. Here's the smudge brush. So you can go through here and you can kind of, again, smudge the pixels as well as the height data in here. And again, if we go through here and we say, okay, alpha, grab doc one more time, this is our new height information, so it's a little bit flatter, and we're kind of messing around with the height data. Let's go ahead and turn that alpha off. So again, all sorts of really cool things you can do with 2.5D data. But instead of it happening in this weird canvas form, we can actually do this functionality on our object. So let's go ahead and grab our object back, drag it on our canvas, go into edit mode. Let's go ahead and turn off this alpha. And with this object, what we can do is we can store it in a 2.5D state temporarily, apply our 2.5D tools to it, and then extract that 2.5D updates that we've made to our mesh to our actual geometry. So again, now we're back in real geometry. We can go over here to Document, Drop3D. That puts us in a 2.5D state. Think of it as dropping it on your canvas essentially temporarily. And then now we can go through here, and if we grab the single layer brush, again, we'll do a line stroke with an alpha. And as we drag this over the object, it's creating a line across the object. And if we hit W, that'll bring up the move widget, and we can go through here. If you grab just this top one, it'll move it in that single axis. If you grab between two axes, you can actually just kind of move it around. Same thing with, so we're in move mode, you can hit E to go into scale mode, R to go into rotate mode. So scale is the same thing. Uniform scale is right here. Non-uniform scale is choosing an axis and then scaling along that axis. Rotate, I'm not really sure what rotate, there we go. Rotate, just grab in between, you can just kind of rotate it around. So not only can you move this around and change it on the fly, even though it's kind of it's sculpted on there, you can actually go in here to Z sub and you can change that. You can crank up the intensity. You can, again, switch it back to Z add. You can store a snapshot. So Shift S is to store a snapshot, and then you can just move this over. So you can make duplicates. Just keep hitting Shift S and moving this over. Go hit Q to go back into draw mode. We can change this from a line stroke to a line 2, which essentially allows you to kind of space these alphas out. So we'll put this up to like 1.3, and now when I drag this alpha out in a line, it'll drag out multiple alphas. And again, you can let that go, turn this to Z sub, hit W, move it around, hit Q, and you're essentially just using all these 2.5D tools to modify your object. Now, when you're done, all you got to do is touch the Drop 3D button again. Let's talk about this though. So subpixel size, it's going to tell you right there, the lower you go, that's going to transfer this sculpted, it's fake sculpted data right now, but we can transfer it to real sculpted data. And when it does that, it's going to take the pre-existing polygons and make them more or less subdivided in order to get the sharpest detail you want out of these. So the higher this is, the less it's going to do that. The lower this is, so if we turn this down to like 1 and then hit Drop 3D, what that's going to do is it's going to mask out everything that was not affected by our brush stroke. And then we turn on polyframe, you're going to see here is our original Dynamesh mesh, and then you're going to see wherever we had this 2.5D brush stroke, it went through, masked out that area, subdivided it, and then displaced this mesh in order to get that 3D sculpted effect on our object. So again, it's going to modify your topology through locally subdividing to get the amount of resolution it needs to get you the quality that you dialed in here in your subpixel size. Optimize is essentially going to do the exact same thing, only it's going to try to use as little geometry as possible. So now, before I unmask this, we just picked this up from the Drop 3D. We can actually go in here to adjust last. So if we're like, you know what, I don't want it that intense, you can go in here. If you want to invert it, you can just keep pushing forward. You can over crank it if you want to. So you actually have a little bit of extra functionality on top of just using Drop 3D. So you can kind of use Drop 3D and then see it in 3D and then go through here and just kind of dial in maybe a little bit closer to what you would want. When you're done with that, control drag, and there you go. You've got an updated mesh drawn from your 2.5D tools. Now, there is one caveat to that. If I alt tap over here on this eyeball, you're going to see there's geometry here and it's subdivided. So if we go through here and we do choose Drop 3D, there's actually, you don't have to use 2.5D tools. In fact, you can go in here, let's turn off our alpha, switch this to a drag rect stroke. Well, actually that was just for our single layer brush. I changed those settings. If we go in here and we choose any other object in our scene, I'm going to take the sphere 3D and grab that. I'm going to turn off this alpha. So it's in drag rect stroke by default. And we're in Drop 3D mode, so again, it's temporarily dropped to our canvas, let's say. So if I drag out the sphere, what it's going to do is essentially just put an object in our scene. Now, if I hit W, you're going to see I can move this object around, but you can tell by the shadow underneath that it's kind of sitting on top of my object. I can't rotate around because again, it's temporarily dropped to my canvas, but I can kind of tell how far embedded this is into my object just by looking at that shadow underneath. If I want to dig into my object, I can go back here to Z sub, and that'll switch it from a Z sphere that is bubbling out from my object or adding to it to subtracting out from this. And of course, just like anything else, we can move, scale, and rotate. Here's our uniform scale if we want to make this bigger. And more importantly, if I hit W and then go out here to a blank area of my canvas and just drag up and down, that will embed it more or less. So if I put this back to Z add, again, just watch that shadow and you'll see, oh, here's my sphere. Oh, it's inside my object. Now it's coming out. Now it's way above my object. So we're just going to kind of embed this quite a bit. Let's switch this to Z sub. So we'll go ahead and again, just kind of hit W, go out to your canvas and just drag up and down, and that will embed it more or less. When you're done, hit Q to go back into draw mode. And then if you want to draw another sphere, you can just click and drag in here. And you know what? I like that. Let's go ahead and keep that. I'm going to drag another sphere in here. I'm going to switch this one to Z add. And then I'm going to hit W, and then we'll hit E to scale it so we can move, scale, and rotate. Again, hit W and drag up and down to embed this more or less. Hit Q. When you're all done, go ahead and go out of Drop3D mode, and you'll see it went ahead and masked the areas that you weren't affecting, but you're going to see, hey, wait, it just kind of pushed the geometry around. That's because, again, we had those relationships between our subdivision level 1, 2, and 3. So this tool is smart enough to know, hey, if you have subdivision levels, I'm not going to mask and locally subdivide where you're making these changes. I'm just going to push the geometry around so you don't lose the relationship between subdivision level 1, 2, and 3. If you don't care about your subdivisions, before you go into Drop3D, we'll just do another version. We'll say delete lower. That'll tell it I don't care about subdivisions, I just have geometry. Then when you go in here to Drop3D, grab your sphere, drag it out into your canvas, say Z sub, hit W, hit Q, drag another one out on our canvas, we'll hit Z add on this one, hit W, again move this up or down, and then when you're done doing all this, if we go out of Drop3D mode, now you're going to see it's a much crisper result, because of when we unmask and go look at this, it did actually locally subdivide along here. It didn't just push the geometry around, it actually modified this geometry. And of course you can use this in conjunction with the other things we've talked about. If you want to go, move your camera around, go back in here to Drop3D, switch over to a, single layer brush with an alpha, with a stroke. We can just do drag dot stroke. So we can just go through here and we'll change this to Z add. There we go. And then so we're going to Z add some dots along here, whatever, and then go out of Drop3D mode, exact same thing. So we can use 2.5D brushes along with objects. And you don't have to use just primitives. You can go in here, let's go out of edit mode. Let's say always switch. Let's hit Control N to clear our canvas. Let's go BI brush in, drag out a polymesh star in here. Let's go BI to go to brush insert. Let's go to IMM model kit brush. Your icon may look a little different than mine. If we hit W on our keyboard, that's going to put us into gizmo mode, and as I drag along here, it'll go ahead and update and switch these objects. So you can, let's grab this cone object here. Let's go, well, let's hit Q to go back into draw mode. Let's hit Control D a couple times just to make this really, really smooth. And then if I go back to my object here, let's go over to this other side, or where this eyeball is. Now, instead of going in here and dragging out an IMM brush, because that's essentially what this is, you can just drag out a brush and then you can say, okay, split mask points, or move this in and out, and Boolean or Dynamesh this together. We're going to use the Drop3D functionality with this object. I'll tell you the differences. So I'm going to hop into Drop3D mode. We're in a drag dot stroke. Let's switch this to a drag. Well, we're in single layer brush. Let's go ahead and just grab this mesh that we borrowed. Incidentally, I don't have it installed, but there is an IMM extractor plugin that you can download from the Pixelector website that you can extract all the subtools from any brush that you want. And there's even this from IMM brush that we'll talk about, or from IMM alpha capture that we'll talk about in the next video. That's interesting too. But for now, we have this object selected, we have drag, rect, stroke, we don't need the alpha. And now when I drag this out, we're using this object. So now if I hit W again, we can move this object around, we can go out here and we can click and kind of embed it into our object. And remember, if I go hit Q to go back into draw mode, this is picking up the surface normal here. Now, it is going to, you might be thinking, oh, does that mean if I put this over here and it's pointing this way, that it's when I go out of Drop3D mode and I look straight down at this object, it's going to be exactly what I would expect? Probably not, and I'll explain why when we pick it up. Another thing you can do while you're in here is remember you have access to the picker orientation, and this little arrow in here switches it from continuous over here to just picking the orientation you want when you drag it out. So if you want it to look straight at your camera every time you drag this out, just switch it from here, just click on this here, the arrow's pointing straight at you. So now when I drag this out, it's going to be looking straight. It's not going to use the surface normal, it's just going to look straight at me. And then of course you can go through here, you can move it up or down, you can hit Shift S to store a snapshot, you can move another copy, hit Q to go back into draw mode, etc. So we've used an arbitrary mesh to go into Drop3D mode to apply to our object. However, remember what I was talking about here. Oh, and also we deleted our subdivision history, so this should go ahead and mask these areas and locally subdivide. So we're going to go out of Drop3D mode. Our subpixel size is set to 1. We're not doing any optimize, so we're fine. And we're going to undrop this, basically. So it's masked any of the polygons that we've changed on our object, but when we go to the side, you see what it did there? It basically, from this camera angle, this is the object, but it's really just, it's a 2.5D solution, which means it's like an alpha that you drag. It's not an IMM brush or a vector displacement alpha brush. It's just basically an alpha that you drag on here, and it's going to shoot straight back to your surface. So if you wanted it to look more like this one, you'd basically have to drop, apply, move your camera to this angle, drop, apply, move your camera to this angle, drop, apply, etc., just to get that effect. These ones aren't too terrible because this is essentially, if I was doing some hard surface modeling, I would just kind of apply this and have it go straight back, and it would be like a little inset socket or port or something like that to put a wire in or something like that. I just wanted to let you know that that is the difference there. I'm going to take these undo sliders back, and we're just going to clear these eyeballs out, and I want to show just one more thing. So again, geometry, we don't have any subdivision history, so it'll actually change our objects. I just want to make sure that you understand when I go into Drop3D mode and I switch this out, we'll keep drag rect, we'll do a little bit of a sharper alpha 14 maybe, and I'm going to change the brush. Actually, I should have done this before I started changing settings. Change this to simple brush is fine. We're going to switch this to drag rec, switch this to alpha 14. I'm going to pick a different color like red. So we're in drop mode. I'm going to just drag this out on our canvas. I'm going to turn off Z add. I'm going to keep RGB on but crank it up to 100. And I'm going to drag this out. So now, let's make that a little sharper. Maybe alpha 58. There we go. Super sharp alpha. But again, it's just RGB information, and I can hit W and move this around. I can scale it uniformly here or non-uniformly if I scale it along here. So we can go through here and scale this. I can hit Q to go back into draw mode. I can switch my colors. Let's do maybe a yellow, and I'll put one right in the middle here. And again, you can hit W to position it as best as you want. You can hit Shift S to store a snapshot. You can hop into scale. You can scale this down. Actually, I don't know if, yeah, you can change the color too. How cool is that? Didn't even know. So you can, do a store. I did a snapshot, scaled it down. It was the same color. I switched the color on the fly. It'll update on the fly. Very neat. We'll change it to black. Hit Q. If we're done drawing, we can go, we're doing RGB drawing in Drop3D mode. If I go out of Drop3D, it's going to mask these areas that we weren't affecting and then unmask these areas and do a local subdivide. So when I turn on my polyframe and look, you can see this area that it was changing is a higher subdivision level than this area to get that crispness that we were looking for when we were in Drop3D mode. So it works with sculpting, it works with Polypaint, it works with Polypaint and sculpting at the same time. And when we get into stencils in the next video in conjunction with Drop3D, you'll see even more of that functionality. So just to kind of keep playing with this a little bit more, let's hit the comma key. Let's go into project. Let's go into demo drone. That'll load that up. Let's turn off our floor and our perspective. Go into subtool, hold down shift, turn off all of these icons here, all the colorized icons, the paintbrush icons. And we want to, let's say, go ahead and put some detail on this flat portion right here. So if I hit Q and then Alt tap this subtool, it's going to select it out of here. If I go into solo mode, you see this is the only thing we have selected. If we go down here to geometry and dynamic, you're going to see dynamic subdivision is on. This is basically just a preview of what it would look like subdivided. If you turn this off, you're going to see that it's fairly subtle. Let's zoom in a little bit. So on, it kind of softens these edges. It's basically doing smooth subdiv of 3 and a little bit of Q grid. So you can go through here and change your Q grid settings and your smooth subdiv settings to dial that in. If you want to make it real geometry, you can hit apply, and that'll give you subdivisions. So if we go through here to polyframe, you can see subdivision level 1, 2, 3, and 4 is on this object. Or if we undo out of that, we can literally just turn dynamic off, and that'll just be the super low res geometry sitting here. I'm just going to keep it off. But remember, if you want to use the Drop3D with subdivisions, it's just going to push the geometry you have there. I guess we'll just go ahead and do it just so you understand. So for example, if we have dynamic and then we hit apply, we now have subdivisions. However, this geometry is really subdivided unevenly. It's packing all this information in these weird areas. So let's look straight down at this object. If we're going to do a 2.5D projection on a hard surface object, I want to kind of look straight down at this. So in 2023, you can hit W and then Alt tap any flat surface, or any surface really. Hold down shift, touch the blue Z direction, and that'll move your camera to look directly down at this object. Then you can just hold down Alt and kind of zoom in using your ZBrush navigation. So I'm now going to go in here to Drop3D. We have subdivision history on this object. It's really badly distributed, just the way it was kind of made. So if we tried to do this, just to kind of let you know how it's going to work, if we go back in here to like, okay, give me my single layer brush with a line stroke and a little bit of a harder alpha, and we go through here, it'll let you look like it's doing a pretty good job because it hasn't been applied yet. It's just fake, right? But again, we can do like Shift hit W and then Shift S to store a screenshot, and we can do a copy. And here's another cool trick. If you hit Q to go back into draw mode, and let's go, I'm gonna put a line this way, but when I drew this, I'm gonna hold down Control. And then I'm gonna hold down Control and drag another line. And then I'm gonna keep holding down Control, and I'm gonna drag out another line. While you're holding down Control, it's adding to the same stroke. So what I mean by that is if I hit W now, it's going to move the last 3 strokes that I had because I had Control held down. It'll move all of those. And again, we can set that to Z sub, move this around, Shift S, move all these around. Because I had Control held down, it'll make all of that one stroke basically. So this is all fine and good. I'm like, okay, it looks great. Let's drop 3D, but it's going to look like garbage because when I unmask, if we go in here to geometry, I had subdivision levels and it wanted to maintain that relationship, and the geometry was like it basically packed all the geometry in these little areas, so it was really unevenly distributed and it just did a terrible job. So in order to avoid that, what I would do is, number one, if you want to have the nice fall off on your edges, go ahead and apply your dynamic and then delete lower, and that will allow Drop3D to modify the geometry where it needs to. In this particular case though, I'm just going to go down to subdivision level 1 and delete higher, maybe. Actually, let's go all the way back. So here I'm just going to undo back, because basically what I want to do is, instead of having dynamic turned on, I'm just going to turn it off, and then I just have this plain old geometry here. It's not super subdivided, but that's kind of one of the strengths of Drop3D is you can go in here, like say you had a decimated mesh for a 3D print, or you just want to have really low res geometry with a little bit of detail packed in. You don't have to subdivide the entire thing up to like 2 million just to put a little detail in here. What you can do is, again, hit W, Alt tap that surface, hold down Shift so your camera's looking right at it. We'll move this around. Let's go out of polyframe mode. We'll go into Drop3D mode. Again, I'm going to go to my line here. Let's swap this out. Let's take Alpha 09 and we'll do like a grid stroke. And the grid settings are right here. M and S repeat. So when you drag this out, you'll get 4x4. So we can drag this out. We can hit W. We can move these around, move scale, rotate, lower or raise the Z intensity. Whatever you want to do, hit Q to go back into that mode. We can switch this. Again, this line is interesting. So we'll take this line here and we'll say the spacing is at 1.3. That's great. So we can go ahead and just drag out a bunch of these and then hit W, Shift S, make a copy, Shift S, make a copy. Anything you want to do, if you want to add polysphere, drag this out, hit W. Oh, let's turn off perspective. That's doing some weird stuff. I didn't remember turning that on. So be out of perspective mode, and then when you drag on an object, when you click out here and drag up and down with move, it'll embed the object more or less. When you're done playing around with this, now when we pick up Drop3D, because I didn't have any subdivision history, it masked the areas it needed to change. I can unmask this now, and now look at that. So, and if we go into polyframe mode, all of this, most of the geometry is still its low res. It just subdivided where it needed to in order to get that detail you needed. And at this point, if you wanted to, you could go into Z plugin, decimation master, drop down that decimated down to whatever you want. It just gives you a little bit of freedom to do that. So in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about stenciling, organic stenciling, along with hard surface stenciling. So we'll use the exact same objects we've been using. I'm just going to split it off into another video because this one's getting a little bit long.